It's great to be here.
Wonderful. Well, I think we can get started.
That sounds really good. Well, it was wonderful to get the opportunity to come and sort of talk about some of what I do. And this 10 ways to create awesome nonprofit meetings is a subject that's really, really dear to my heart. So I'm just going to jump right in here, Marina, and we'll get going.
Sounds great.
So whenever I give a talk, whether it's 10 people, 50 people, wherever I'm giving sort of a lecture, I always see, I'm going to ask your whole audience right now, just wherever they're sitting, to raise their hand if they love meetings. Marina, do you love meetings?
Well, I think that depends, Gord. Depends on the meeting. I think you can probably empathize with that.
I love your laughter, which is quite diplomatic there, because the next question I ask people to raise their hands about is how many people have fallen asleep in a meeting. And when I think about the people who are listening in right now, I can almost guarantee you, certainly from what I've seen in these live audiences, that more people are raising their hand because they've fallen asleep in a meeting than they have because they love them. And so the opportunity today, to claw back some of that time and bring in some of the things. One of the big statistics that we come across is BusinessInsider.com. They've got a great stat that says, there's $37 billion in productivity being lost in the United States alone every year due to unproductive meetings. And if we extrapolate that for the global economy, it could be $1 trillion in lost productivity due to, sort of lousy meetings overall. And if the total global economy is about $80 trillion, imagine having, almost more than 1% being lost to something that we really have a lot of control over. So I really like to get the message out about how to make things better. Oh, sorry, just going to get in there. One of the next things I like to do then is jump in and say, let people know why I love meetings. And I actually get to work as a professional meeting facilitator and consultant. And every time I'm in the room, the meetings go really, really well. And let me describe this. I could be with, again, 10 people, 12 people, 25 people, 3-hour meetings, 4-hour meetings, 5-hour meetings. These meetings are lit up because I'm in there, and I'm kind of the objective outsider who gets to go to work and make things happen. But it didn't always happen that way. And I've probably been in more than 2,000 meetings in my career. And if you think about that, that sounds like a big number, but the reality is if you just add it up in your own head, everybody on the call is going to be in probably between, I'm going to say 1,000 and possibly as high as 5,000 meetings in their lifetime. And so it's really, really important that we put the effort in to do everything we can, whether we're a facilitator or a participant, to make our next meeting as good as possible. And why do I love nonprofit meetings? And this is where I have to tell a story that's very, very dear to my heart because, I'm working as a professional meeting facilitator and consultant, and there was one time when I was in to do a strategy session with a nonprofit organization, and we were patiently waiting, about 8 of us in this, nonprofit board meeting setting, and this very kind volunteer board chair was about 15 minutes late. He walked in the door. He started talking about, something that was unrelated to what we were talking about, certainly for the strategy session. Now, as a good consultant, what I'm supposed to do is just sit there, not say a thing, because then I'll get on to do the work and get paid and get out the door. But something instinctive happened for me in that moment. I stood up, I looked at this really nice guy, and I said, you're late, you're talking about your dog. This meeting, if you look around the room and you add up kind of the opportunity cost or, the potential wages that these people are worth, is probably worth $2,000 an hour. Now, what do you want to do about it? Now, I just figured, of course, at that moment that I was going to get kicked out the door and never be asked back, but that's not what happened, and this is why I tell this story. Within a few seconds, the guy that they had worked to get as a volunteer on that board to do the finance work, he piped up and he said, well, thank goodness somebody said something about this because I was going to quit. Now, that's a very important story and pivotal story for me because what I think is happening is whether it's in nonprofit staff meetings, board meetings, wherever it's happening in nonprofit, because they're not being run well, we are losing capacity. We lose interest. And so why do I love nonprofit board meetings? It's the opportunity to get in there, give them the good stuff that's going to allow them to get going forward and make their meetings fantastic, whether it's for employee retention, volunteer retention, whatever that really, whatever that thing is important to their organization. I think we've got a chance to do a poll question now, and this is going to kick things off. If you can
Great. Yeah, I've
get
got
on
it
there.
up on the screen there, Gord. So everyone, if you can go ahead and participate in our first poll, our nonprofit meetings are awesome, okay, ineffective, or oh gosh, make me want to quit. So if you can go ahead and just click the answer on your screen that works for you. And it's looking like we've got just about everybody voting here. Great. So I'm just going to close and share the poll. So looks like, Gord, we've got only 4% awesome, 70% say okay, 20% say ineffective, and 6% say they want to quit.
Well, and I'm not surprised, and it's the okay part. You know, the ends of the spectrum are kind of what they are, and awesome maybe is something to aspire to. And I'm often get approached after talks, you know, about those people who want to quit. It's the okay ones that I'm really interested in because, again, people, you know, 70% of the people have a good base, but what is it then that could take them sort of up a notch so that they can really get into that, you know, where they feel they want to raise their hand and say that, yeah, you know what, our meetings are awesome. Our meetings drive all of our strategic objectives, and this is what we want to get into today to discuss during this webinar.
Awesome. I'm just going to go ahead and hide this poll so you can get back to your presentation.
Yeah, well, and the next concept up here is I really think that meetings are your early warning system because, you know, years ago they used to have, you know, in mining they would take the canary down into the coal mine, and if there was deadly gases, that poor little canary, you know, wouldn't be singing songs for very long, but if there weren't, you know, then these guys could go to work. And I always say, you know, I hope there's no deadly gases in your meetings, but if you can look at meetings as really kind of a unit that if it's going well, the whole organization's going well, because it's really a symbol of the total interaction, then it's worth aspiring to make sure that that subunit of your whole organization is really happening as well as possible. And I'm just going to click on the slide there. Today, this is the list that we're going to actually go through and take the audience through to learn these techniques. The first step is to get real with yourself, and I'm going to be explaining a little bit about sort of personal responsibility in a meeting there. The next step is to get real with your team, and that really fundamentally is about team trust, but I'll be going into some detail there as well. You want to know your total meeting cost, very important for anybody in terms of what's going on, especially in terms of time in the nonprofit sector. Getting a great facilitator, very important for any meeting that you do. Get real with your strategy. This is really important, and I'll get into that one as well. Creating a Blockbuster agenda, it's because I believe that every agenda should be as good as the script for your favorite Hollywood film and create that level of excitement, but I'll get into that as well. You want to meet in the right space. All kinds of things to say about that, including something that's going to be, I hope, innovative for a lot of your audience. Getting awesome resources, pretty natural. Some good book titles I'll recommend in there. Following up fast, and in this area we'll talk really about treating each other like your best customer, and that being very important to drive follow-up and make sure that it's used in a way that keeps your strategy moving forward. And finally, you want to get inspired, find your inspiration, and really take action. This is so important because otherwise the time that you're spending on this today, if you're not putting it into action almost right away, then, you know, it's not going to be really worth your time. So moving on, getting real with yourself. Now, I believe that you can choose how you act during a meeting. And I'll tell you my personal story about why I put this concept up, and I hope that your audience can benefit from this as well. Back in about 2004, I was working in a corporate setting, and I'm going to say for probably a year and a half, I was coming home complaining about all kinds of things, including meetings, and complaining, and it brings up a sidebar thing, which is if you're complaining more about meetings than the time you're spending in meetings, then there's really a big problem, and that's certainly what I was doing back in 2004. And in the spring of that year, my wife looked at me and she said, "Stop it." And that stopped me dead in my tracks because I just was so used to prattling on and on about problems. I wasn't trying to take responsibility for me as sort of a participant in those meetings. I was really just prattling on, and that started me kind of on a long journey now, 12 years now, of figuring out how to take responsibility, whether I'm running it or whether I'm a participant. And one of the big lessons that I learned along the way came when I read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Marina, do you know this story?
No, I don't think I do, Gord.
Yeah, so Viktor Frankl was taken prisoner of war in the Nazi concentration camps, and He was a psychologist, and going into this situation, 1 in 28 people made it out. This guy was in there and gained a really interesting perspective. I mean, people beside him were getting murdered, starving to death, being mistreated. So was he. But during that time, he made this remarkable discovery. He discovered that in between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is the power to choose your freedom. Now, I'm not suggesting that anybody's meetings are happening at that profound level, but what I am saying is that we do have choice, and I believe that we have choice. And I hope if you can kind of take that forward and choose how you're going to react, choose how you're going to act during a meeting, that's one of the ways to participate right away to make your next meeting even better. Here's another way to make your next meeting better. I use the word point to help people remember how to make a great point during a meeting. And here's how I use the word point. The first thing when you're making a point in a meeting, because you want to be succinct when you get there, is you want to prepare your idea. And when we talk about preparing your idea, that's talking to your colleagues, doing your research. Another part when I talk to people about preparing their idea is really respecting what I'll call blue sky moments. I did some work years ago with a chief financial officer at a major company, and he told a story about one day when he was sitting there with his feet up on the desk. This is a multi-billion-dollar company. And another executive walked in and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he confidently said, "You know what? I'm thinking." And when I think about the executive directors that I deal with, I know in my work, there's so many things on that to-do list that when they're preparing ideas, I really hope they can carve out the necessary time to do the combination of talking to colleagues and the blue sky thinking and getting prepared so that when they're going into their meetings, and it could be anybody going to a meeting, you're really well prepared. Then what you need to do is optimize the benefits of your preparation. So that's really getting it down to what we'll call an elevator pitch. You know, if you can't get your idea across in kind of 30 seconds, a minute, this kind of thing, so when it's your turn to come and speak in the meeting, you're going to really pop this out because you've practiced it, and then you're going to say it in a very succinct way. And then the next one's one of my favorites because, you know, we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that's a great ratio for thinking about, you know, listening and talking. You want to invite feedback, and I know one of the mistakes I used to fall into years ago when I would invite feedback. I would actually say, "Hey, what do you think about my idea in a meeting?" And then somebody would start to speak, and then I would cut them off. I would just say, no, but what I meant was, the tough part about inviting feedback is really having the patience to absorb and listen and just shut up for just a couple seconds while you take it in, because then that leads to the next part, which is to name the hurdles and solutions. And this is now really making the point valuable because all in the same 5, 10, 15 minutes, you've prepared it, you've said the succinct thing, people have had their say about it. Now you can say, well, what are the obstacles to getting this point to go forward? And it's not that we can solve everything in every meeting, but it's trying to aspire to do that because why are you meeting in the first place? So you're naming the hurdles, and then for every hurdle, you're seeing if you can come up with a solution right there in that moment. And then hopefully you can use the T in point to take action on what you've just said. And this creates accountability, it creates momentum, and imagine, just imagine, if everyone in your next meeting was coming in this well prepared, not the kind of prattling on and on I know I experience in so many meetings over the years in different settings where people aren't ready for the meeting and they come in, they start talking, and they're not really clear. This is a great way, just a handy acronym to be very clear, and this is, again, taking responsibility for yourself no matter whether you're, again, the presenter, the facilitator, or if you're just a participant in a given meeting. Then you're getting real with your team, and this is the second step out of the 10 steps. And so the first thing I always say is, you know, why would you bother getting real with your team? And when I say that, it's sometimes the momentum in certain meetings, if weekly meetings, standing meetings, those ones kill me. I hear about those things. But, you know, where are you going to find the reason to make a difference? And if you're not, just don't do it. But if there's some motivation in there where, you know, you're going to want to extend or build more trust with your team because you know that's going to be valuable for making your meetings better, find that reason so you know a very powerful why. Then you want to take a moment and get a snapshot of your team. And so, you know, I know in my book, for example, or you can just do this very simply, and I was just thinking about how to do this today for your audience, but, you know, you can, on a scale of 1 to 10, if you took some basic criteria, do we trust each other? Are we accountable? Do we turn our phones off? Wherever that thing is, when you're going to a meeting. Give yourself a number. And if you're giving yourself a 10, great. You don't need to do any more work in getting kind of real with each other. But let's say you give yourself a 6, and that's like that 70% that came up in the poll. Then you want to aspire to maybe an 8 or a 9. Then what you're doing is you're going to imagine what your ideal meeting would be like, and you've got now a gap in between this rating that you've given yourself. And you want to then start to plot out the things that are going to help you to move towards improving that rating for where you are, and you want to close the gap. And hopefully, again, the why is a powerful motivator. Sometimes there's meetings where the conflict is too high, and that's really a motivator for people to get things done. Sometimes there's really significant issues. We need more donors. We need more staff, whatever those things are, and then the meetings are the way to catapult them forward. With a strong why, it's really worth getting real with your team. A big part of getting real with your team in terms of tools is learning how to fight. And I put this phrase out there, and some people say, no, let's say learn how to disagree or whatever. I'm not respectful about this for a certain thing, is that we just don't have time for disagreements in meetings. So again, what are your meeting ground rules that you want to lay down for your meeting specifically? And we could probably list 10 of them. One of the first ones I'm going to say for a basic meeting ground rule that your audience can take away today and put into action is, when one person talks, everybody listens. And this is getting, immediately away from diffusing kind of those shouting things that can occur. And again, I would encourage your audience to say, what are our ground rules? Start there, and then when a disagreement comes up, how can we, a second one that I always bring up, certainly in facilitation, is making sure that the disagreement is about the issue and not about the people. We don't want these things to become personal, because that's really not what it's about. It really is about solving problems. So learning how to fight, laying down your ground rules for your meeting, take that away today and start to do that, and again, it's a good chance that your meetings will become more productive. And then what you're doing with that in mind, knowing that you know how to disagree, is taking just a little bit more time. I think there's a deficiency these days in building rapport with our teammates. And when I say building rapport, the example that I like to use from my own sort of career was there was a woman that I'd worked with and been in meetings with over the years, didn't know very well, yet she sat beside me. But at a Christmas party one year, I found out, after talking to her for about an hour, that she took a lot of her salary and sent it back home to support her family in another country. And this blew me away. This was so inspiring, and yet here I had been sitting beside this person for many years, and that then made me go to bat for her even more the next time I was in a meeting with her. So sometimes your inspiration can come from outside, but I think sometimes often your rapport and your inspiration can come directly from your meeting teammates. So that's another kind of concrete tool that you can take forward. We find comfort among those who agree with us and growth among those who don't. So we want to disagree, we want to grow, but we want to do it in a controlled way that makes sure that our meetings are as effective as they can be. And finally, when you're getting real with your team, you want to set your team up for success. And one of the key components of this is knowing that you have the right people in the room to solve the problem that you're trying to solve. Another example from my career was there was one time a frantic manager came around, grabbed sort of a bunch of us in the hallway. Come on, we've got to get into this meeting right away. And he threw up a marketing problem. He said, we've got to solve this marketing problem. And he went on and on and on. I had that kind of out-of-body experience when I pulled back and I looked around and I realized that what he was asking us to solve, the people in the room didn't have the skill set to get that done. Certainly in the nonprofit sector, I would say if you're bringing problems into a board setting, before you go in there, if you want to set that team up for success, you want to make sure that you've got the right players in the room to solve that. If you need to do fundraising, that's a typical one, and you don't have anybody in there who's really capable of fundraising or doesn't have the proper network to reach out to get dollars in the room, then bring in the outside resources that you need to supplement that meeting so you're going to solve that problem. That's an example of setting the team up for success. And certainly accountability, we understand that, naturally, but that might go onto your ground rules list where we're going to set up and be accountable. As good Canadians, we let each other off the hook so often. When we say something in a meeting, yeah, I'm going to get that done, and then especially, between monthly meetings, often it just gets let go of, and then people walk in and there's no accountability mechanism and it doesn't get done. So it slows all kinds of things down. So how are you going to be accountable? Think about that, think that through. The next step in the 10 steps is knowing your total meeting cost. And one of the questions I just have to ask you, Marina, at this point is, who's your favorite hockey team?
Oh my goodness, that is a loaded question. Well, I guess because I'm out west, I'm going to have to go with the Vancouver Canucks.
Oh, I knew you'd go with the Canucks. I knew it. And here I am in Edmonton suffering with all these #1 draft picks and oh, I'm sure there might be some people from Toronto on the line, and we could go on and on about hockey teams all day. The reason I bring that one up, it's just so fun. The average NHL hockey team's making about $60 million a year, the players. Like if you look at the total salaries for the team. So if you divide that by about 2,000 hours a year, because they work as many hours as we do, you and me, 1 hour of meeting time with an NHL player meeting is $30,000. And I can't even imagine right now being in the Oilers locker room or the Leafs locker room and meeting with those players for an hour given that performance by those teams. But that's sort of a fun, exaggerated story I like to tell that brings it down into a level into your own meeting. So if there's a staff meeting in a nonprofit setting, add up the wages. And when I say the wages, I mean the all-in wages, not just the hourly wage, but are there benefits involved and this kind of thing. Pretty quickly you're into a couple $100 once you throw in kind of the room cost and maybe there's some muffins and that kind of stuff. In some of those monthly board meetings when it's a big deal and maybe there's a meal being provided and there's 12, 16 people in the room, this kind of thing, it could be $1,000, $2,000 an hour for some of these board meetings that are happening. So if you're starting to be aware of it, and you don't need to do heavy-duty, managerial accounting to figure this out, I'm hoping that you're able to point that out and have that as incentive so that every second of every meeting, no matter which meeting it is in your meeting, make every second count because you really can't afford it. And the other thing that was just talking about the dollars, really the other thing that's huge in the nonprofit area is time. I'll go back to my first story that I told, which is these people that are volunteering, they want their time spent well. So if you know the value of their time and you honor that, there's a good chance, again, that your next meeting is going to go even better. Number 4, get a great facilitator. Well, how is your current facilitator? Are they running a good meeting? I know that, again, back to the poll, it was 70%, so it's kind of good. So it implies that there's a bit of room for improvement. So you can do this in a detailed way, and there's ways that I help people to do this, but just on a scale of 1 to 10, just think about your current facilitator. Are they, can they help the talkers to slow down so that the quiet people can speak up? That's a good example of a, sort of a higher level facilitator. Are they preparing the agenda, this kind of stuff? So give them a 1 out of 10. Again, let's just say they're at a 6. Then there's a chance to talk about, can they improve? And I ask this kind of in a straightforward way because really, without a good facilitator, meetings don't stand a chance. So if they can improve, then you're going to put them on some sort of training track. Maybe they get like a simple session or something that helps them, improve a little bit if they only need a little bit, or you put them on a longer track, 90 days, 180 days, and you get them to get better, then your meetings start to improve. The other thing that people have to deal with, though, and I'm going to say again in my experience in nonprofit, because everybody is just so nice, is you have to ask this question honestly. Should the facilitator be removed from the situation? And be honest about this, because in my opinion, your meetings just don't have time for a bad facilitator. So if they should be removed, remove them. And you can't do that fast enough. And that's because you've judged that they can't be sort of trained and that kind of thing. Now, if they can be trained, one of the great ways to train them is to actually get what I call a meeting mentor. And I know that people understand this for themselves individually, where they work with a mentor kind of one-on-one. When I say a meeting mentor, hopefully somebody within your organization or a friend of the organization, this is trying to get an unpaid scenario going here, can come in and let's just say break it down into 3 simple meetings. They would come in and they would observe the facilitator running a meeting. The next time they're going to run the meeting, and then the third time you're going to sort of balance that out and you're going to be communicating in between. And this is a simple 3-step process where somebody who's an experienced facilitator comes in and sharpens up your facilitator very, very quickly in, again, a very short period of time. I'm going to say 90 days if you're meeting monthly. It can be 30 days if you're meeting weekly. And this gets your meetings, gets some energy in and gets that to go. So reach out to friends of the organization or within the organization. Can't say enough about getting a meeting mentor in very, very quickly. We're on to another poll question.
Great. So let me just get that up on the screen here. Awesome. Okay, so everybody, we want you to go ahead and vote on your screen. Our current meeting facilitator is awesome, needs more training, or should be replaced. So let's get everybody voting there just on your screen. We just want a few more people. There we go. Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to close and share this with everyone. So it looks like 30% awesome, 61% needs more training, and almost 10% should be replaced.
Yeah, and again, that's sort of not surprising in terms of how that question gets answered. And without sort of dwelling on that one too much, because I spoke a lot about it, I'm glad to hear that feedback from people, and sort of the people in the audience that answer that way are going to kind of know what they need to do next. I'm going to move on to the next step here, which is getting real with your strategy. And this is one of my favorite parts of the whole talk, because really I can tell you that I believe that you should be able to connect every meeting directly to your strategy. And I'm going to say that twice. It's so important. I believe that you should be able to connect every meeting directly to your strategy. The reason that I say this is that it begs the question, what is your strategy? And when you ask that simple question, it can break down pretty quickly to say, can you state your vision statement simply? Most people can't, I'm going to say in my experience, but let's say you can, that's fine. And then the next question that I would ask in there is, strategically, what are your top 3 key strategic objectives? And I love asking that one because it's quite practical. And I'm going to go back to fundraising as a typical nonprofit issue, but let's just say your number 1 priority is to raise funds for the organization. Then in your next meeting, you should be able to stop at any moment and say, if that was number 1, are we addressing that issue right now? So often people get sidetracked by talking about the summer barbecue or this kind of thing. It's certainly been my experience in meetings. And I hope that, again, this meeting unit can be used to add up to drive your strategy rather than just being one more thing as you go along. So I think that's a really important step out of the 10 steps that you can implement in your meetings right away. Creating a Blockbuster agenda. This is step number 6. Again, I mentioned that I think agendas are just, they're getting a bad ride these days. Again, sort of what happens with them is people prepare them and then they don't get used right, or they don't know how to implement them, and then the energy goes out of them, and people are either showing up with no agenda, or it's kind of one of those ones got like 6 or 7 on it, and there's not any energy in it at all. And I hope to give you another little acronym here that you can use to use your agendas to get some energy in and life into them and make them, again, what I hope to be as exciting as your favorite Hollywood film. All right, here we go. The A in agenda for me is to have an attention grabber. At the beginning of this presentation, I asked people, have you ever fallen asleep in a meeting? And that's sort of a fun way into a meeting. But there are serious issues as well. And if you want to talk about an attention grabber, if you're about to close the doors, or you're 6 months out because you need a gift or some funding or whatever it is that you need to keep it alive, make it 1 sentence. Say it, and then let the silence hang in the air. And that's an attention grabber to come in on the serious side. So you can come in on the light side, you can come in on the heavy side, but certainly what you want to do is get the attention, and you want to make sure that attention grabber is right there on the agenda. Next, you want to have great goals. Now, I talked about in connecting your meeting to the strategy that you've defined these strategic objectives. Get them onto the agenda. If they're missing from the agenda, you may miss then the opportunity to carry your great goals forward. So back to that fundraising one, that's an example that might be on a typical agenda. Create excitement. I love quotes. I love inspirational stories. Again, I think people have them. It's just the agenda is an opportunity as a place to capture them. So get those things onto your agenda as well. And at some point during the meeting, you're going to throw to an inspirational quote, a story, an achievement by one of your key staff members, and you're going to make sure that gets brought up during the meeting. Navigation tools, the N in agenda. I throw that on there for the facilitators because I know that when I facilitate, sometimes I get into a jam and I need a reminder about what to use. What tool can I grab right now to jumpstart the meeting and this kind of thing. The one that I'll convey to you that I use a lot is zoom in and zoom out. So often when I'm facilitating, we might be zoomed in, and when I say zoomed in, right in a minute detail for a specific issue. I have the ability, I know, as a facilitator then to pop out at any moment and remind people about the big picture and how to tie that specific detail to their big picture so that everything is tying together. So zoom in, zoom out is sort of my navigation tool. There's other great facilitator tools, whatever yours are, get them onto the agenda, and go to them when the meeting is kind of in a lull or going the wrong way. Use those tools to get you out of a jam. Decide now. If you do nothing else, please, on your next agenda, just put the words "decide now" with a question mark beside every item that you want to get discussed and get done. Because I think so often we are not deciding, we're not taking action on the points that are being discussed in so many meetings at the staffing level, at the board level, whatever that is. So please, these two simple words right there on the agenda, and that has to come up after every point. Are we making a decision on this today? And if not, when are we going to make a decision? And finally, for the A, you want to have an accountability check-in. And that's, again, something that we kind of do, but if you use the agenda to formalize this, then we're going to say, well, let's say someone in the last meeting said that they were going to do hit a fundraising target. I'm going to go out and I'm going to find 5 new donors and we're going to raise $10,000. If they achieve that, then you're able to note that on the agenda, find out when in the meeting you're going to address that. And if they didn't, you're also going to bring it up in the meeting, because so often in meetings, these are these places to publicly declare what's going on, and that's another great way to create accountability. So, using the word agenda to get some energy into these agendas and get them going forward and create excitement, I think is a really great way to think in terms of steps that you can use to make your meetings more productive and profitable. Now, with the agenda, you've taken all this effort, you put it in, you know you're going to go in and you're prepared. One of the things that Hollywood films do really, really well is they market the movie before the movie starts. So I'm going to suggest that you market the agenda before you get to the meeting. And here's a couple techniques about how you might be able to do that. Louder hallway chats. I know when I was a manager of a small team, one of the techniques that I would use when I knew I had exciting information to convey is I might be talking to one person in the hallway, and I would make sure that I, amplified kind of what I was saying so that anybody within ear's reach or further, could really hear what I was saying. And that was kind of a simple way to get good news out. And I know that people would sort of be listening in, and I would use that intentionally as a leader. You can send a survey before the meeting. Again, this is preparation work, right? You say, what do you want in the meeting? Ask them directly. Get their feedback. And that's a great way to say, I'm preparing the agenda. How do you want to influence the agenda? A great way to influence the agenda, I've heard back on a survey, is one person said, listen, I don't need to be there for the whole meeting. Can you please put me in the first 10 minutes? And if you sent that survey and you found that out, then that would be a great way to use one person's time, get them in for the first 10, they say their point and they leave, they feel productive, and you know that they don't have to sit there for information that they don't want to hear. Mail the agenda. I think this actually works really, really well for the current demographic of so many nonprofits in Canada. Stick that thing in an envelope and stick a stamp on it and send it to people. You don't have to do it, obviously, for every meeting, but you could shake it up and send it out to them there. It would just take people by surprise to actually receive it in that manner. And finally, if you're really into the movie thing, you can actually create a little video that's going to promote the movie, and just take a second, do it on your phone, do a quick edit on the phone, have something that's going to promote the meeting, get it out to people. And again, it's another way to, there's more ways than this. This is just sort of, again, ways to market the agenda, and this is because, you put a lot of effort into the agenda, so it's really worth promoting. And we're on to another poll question.
Awesome, Gord. So we are asking you, our meeting agendas are awesome, okay, ineffective, or non-existent. And while everyone's voting, I just want to say I love the idea of doing a video trailer. That is so wonderful.
Well, and it doesn't have to, these days it doesn't have to be, complicated. Really, it could just be the senior leader. If let's say they've got some good news, just throw on the video real quick, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, send the video. We're all craving video these days in so many different ways, and that's just a really fun way to get information out.
I couldn't agree more. And it looks like we've got everyone voted here, so I'm just going to share. We've got 8% awesome, 65% okay, 20% ineffective, 8% non-existent. So most falling in the middle there again.
Well, and my heart goes out to the non-existent folks. That's just one of those rough things where I hope you're able to find ways to maybe take some of these tools today and feed them to the senior leader in some manner, that you can get some energy bumped into the situation. And interestingly enough, it's the okay people that I hope can find a couple things maybe they haven't heard here in today's session, and really take them back and really take it from okay up to awesome. That's certainly my goal for this type of exercise. Moving on, meet in the right space. I've been in a lot of meeting spaces. These days, I actually get frustrated if I walk into a meeting space that's unprepared, and I'm not expecting people to paint the room or anything like that, but what I do mean is there shouldn't be papers lying around and boxes and coffee stains on the table and whiteboards that haven't been cleaned. It's just not conducive. If you put all this energy into creating, a great agenda and you're going to connect the meeting to your strategy, take the extra 5-10 minutes to make sure that the space is really ready to be conducive to what's going on. Now, if you want to take it up a notch, you're going to have the inspirational sayings or the items on the walls that are actually related to your topic. So you can put your 3 strategic objectives up there, and I mean real ones, not fake ones that nobody can repeat, really the real ones that you all really have agreed on. And then one of the fun ones in there is you can do a group portrait of your staff, of your board, have that up on the wall as a reminder of the key people that are really pushing the engine forward. Those are great ways to address the space. There's all kinds of off-site conversations to have. I'm not going to get too detailed in there, but I was talking about what I'm going to say is an innovation in meetings. And it's funny, I probably should have put a poll question in for this, but, just going to click in there. There we go. Marina, have you ever done a walking meeting?
I have not myself, but I hear, I know Beth Cantor is a huge proponent of them, and there's some other people in Canada that are really advocating for this as an idea. It's a really fun concept.
Well, and I just love it because, this was brought to me, and I hadn't really done them before. I do them now. But, if you're meeting with 2-3 people or whatever that's going to be, you want to make sure that you get up and get moving. So often we fall into these typical things. We're meeting weekly, monthly, whatever that is, and we're sitting in the same chair and we're sounding the same, the rhythm is the same and that kind of stuff. And this chance to get up and just give yourself, the first moment here that I'm finding when I talk to people is you want to give yourself permission to actually do it. It seems radical to so many people. Now, the people that are doing it, like you said, they're just getting out there and making it happen, but it really does seem radical. But give yourself permission, and what I would challenge your whole audience to do is the next chance you get up, get moving. Just you can see these guys, bring a laptop, don't bring a laptop, bring your phone, speak about one issue, all your issues, whatever you want to do. The eloquent part about walking meetings is that you are walking in the same direction, and it really is symbolic of common problem solving that we're all running into. So I can't say enough. I know I say this again at pretty much every meeting I'm in and everybody I meet, I'm asking this question. Get out there and do it, and I hope people can take it up and really, make good use of this and get the blood flowing so that their meetings are even better. On to number 8, get awesome resources. There are a load of resources, and I'm just going to say you can type in effective meetings into Google. I don't need to sort of explain that to anybody. I'm going to just explain a couple book titles that I am a fan of that you may be able to use in your next meeting to kind of make them better. The first one is Business Model Generation. This is a terrific book for getting you thinking out of the box and getting you into creative ways to really look at the whole organization and what you're doing or parts of it. There's great marketing tips in there and that kind of thing. The Facilitator's Field Book, it's like a thick phone book, and maybe some of your younger audience doesn't know what a phone book is. I hope they do. This one's super because I go back to it all the time and page through to the places where I need at any given moment, but it's all in there. Fantastic book. And then Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott. This is again back up in those earlier steps. If you're getting into having to deal with tough conversations, moving the needle forward with your team, one of my favorite concepts in this book is to let the silence do the heavy lifting. And I love this because you have to practice. So often we fill up the air with chatter and that kind of thing. But Susan Scott is eloquent in so many ways in this book. But I would just, I would recommend that one as people get on to things. All kinds of other resources that you can get into here too as well. I won't go into too many today because it would take up our whole time. Follow up fast. I'm going to throw another acronym at you. I think in the follow-up phase, really the main theme here, and I mentioned this up earlier, is we want to be treating each other like we treat our best customer in meetings. And I think we fall away from that. We get used to each other, we get into habits, and it starts to feel like brother, sister rather than treating each other like your best customer. But if you're doing this with your best customer and you're following up fast, let's get into this acronym and see how we can use it. The F for me is, what is your feedback loop? One of the disasters that I used to get into, I know in the corporate side, was these mass emails. Somebody gets out of a meeting, they hammer in the information, they send out this mass email, and everybody's got to kind of deal with it. And I think that's tired because we're getting hit in our email box with so much information. When I say what is your feedback loop, does your meeting team just want to get a text with 3 lines, a group text? Does your meeting team like to meet on Facebook? Does your meeting team meet somewhere else that's absolutely unique in terms of what is their way to communicate? So I would just go back to your teams, staff, whatever, and say, how do we want to get feedback? What do we want to get? Do people want to read meeting minutes or not? Or do they really want the key information? Because, again, we're absorbing so much information at a given time. Astonish each other. I was back to that idea that imagine if somebody went out in their last meeting, they declared they were going to raise that 10 grand, they walked into the meeting and they said, you know what? I raised that 10 grand 2 weeks earlier than I said I was going to do it. Well, when you're doing the follow-up, that information is something to broadcast to the world. You really want to send out those good accomplishments as quickly as possible, and this is one of those incremental things that builds momentum for you and your team in between meetings. Standardize the follow-up process. So you can see I didn't get a sheet out here and say there's a checklist to do all the 10 steps. I think really, what's your feedback loop? What's the way that you astonish each other? What's the way that you share information? And take that down and get the top 3, 4, 5 things and build slowly and realistically into the way that the follow-up is going to happen for your group in the best way. And finally, you want to track progress. And this is a really important one for me in the follow-up because, and I'll just ask you, Marina, a question. Where do you guys have a central place where you keep documents and names and numbers and all that kind of thing?
Well, we are actually a virtual organization, so we have lots of complexity on that issue. But yes, we do have a head office in Ontario where we have all the important stuff located.
And is it sitting on a hard drive or in a Google Doc share type thing, or what's the sort of process that you might use?
Yeah, we often use the triplicate idea, so we will have some stuff that is on like a cloud sharing, and then we always want to have hard copies of the important stuff as well.
Yeah, and this is defining between things that are sort of FOIP oriented or things that can be shared. And I'm glad to hear you sort of describe it, because I think when senior leaders in these organizations that are listening today, or even people that are working there or board members are listening in, just ask yourself that question. And the way that I'll define sort of data or documents is, are they static or are they fluid? And when I say static, that means they're sitting in paper in someone's office and not everybody can see them. But if it's supposed to be shared information, how do you get it, I'm going to say, up into the cloud like you mentioned? How do you get it up there so that everybody can see it? And then when the information is starting to be fluid, then the people that need to see it can see it very quickly. I know that I implement Google Doc workflows for some organizations that don't have anything at all, and it's kind of a free workflow they can work into. There are paid ones that you can do as well. I don't advocate for one over the other depending on where your organization is at. I just want to make sure that people have access to the things that they need and you're not sending too many emails. Doing this follow-up process and you're standardizing it, ask yourself that question. Where are our documents? Where is our data? Where's our logo? Where are our photos? All those things that we have to access all the time, and take the time to get them into a place where it's going to move forward easily. And one of the, I hope, innovations in this area that I would recommend if I was, say, implementing a Google Doc workflow is, instead of having a personal email for a board member, I really like the idea of a concept of treasurer secretary at gmail.com, not the name of the person at gmail.com. If you set up the one where it's treasurer secretary, then the next person who comes in as treasurer secretary simply adopts that email, and they use that. And if you do that on a per position basis, it could be for everyone in the company as well, then when turnover happens, the role is not turning over, the person is simply leaving and the new person is filling in that role, and there is continuity for the organization. This speaks to another 5 hours of discussion around succession planning and that kind of thing, but simply starting with, where's our data, where's our documents, can people see what they need to see at a given time, and is it fluid? That's what I mean when I say track progress. And this is it. So, the 10 steps. Getting real with yourself, we talked about, really, choosing how you act during a meeting, no matter whether you are the facilitator or the participant. Getting real with your team, fundamentally, that's about trust. Knowing your total meeting cost, I bring that up because if you make a note of it, it doesn't have to be an extensive exercise, but hopefully it will give you the incentive to control the time and dollar costs of any meeting to make every second count. Get a great facilitator. If someone's there now and they can get better, get them better faster. If they need to go, get them out faster, and possibly think about working with a meeting mentor. Getting real with your strategy. So again, I believe that you should be able to stop any meeting at any moment and connect it directly to your strategy. And I mean to real strategy, not to convoluted words and mission statements that nobody can really restate. Really simple strategic objectives that you can carry forward and know that that meeting is making a difference. The next step, creating a Blockbuster agenda, to summarize on that one, is you want to make your agendas as exciting as the script for your favorite Hollywood movie, and then market that agenda and get it really exciting so that people are going to your meeting and they're anticipating something great's going to happen. Meeting in the right space, no more coffee stains, no more dirty stuff, very focused, maybe get some inspirational sayings in there, and again, try a walking meeting if you get a chance. The awesome resources, I mentioned some titles, there are tons. Get out there, just find them, find your inspiration and get going forward. Follow up fast, use the word fast to follow up and treat each other like you are your best customers, not sort of a tired old relationship. And finally, the 10th step is to take action. Find your why. Find your inspiration. I mentioned I found it in a coworker, and then I got a jump start there to get better in meetings because I found out what she did. Find it from famous people. For me, I can tell you, honestly, Terry Fox is a huge inspiration for me, of someone that I remember in, in moments when I'm not sort of feeling great about things, and I think about the sacrifice that he did, and since when he did what he did, more than $700 million has been raised for that cause. I mean, it just doesn't get better than that for me. So it could be at a local level, it could be at a big level, and you want to make sure you're taking action. And finally, please do not put off until tomorrow what you can get done today. Super critical. There is no time to waste in making your meetings as good as they can be. They will drive productivity. They will drive end user outcomes if they are better for your organization, if that's how you measure things. If you measure dollars, they will drive that too. But I really am very enthusiastic that hopefully someone can grab one thing, maybe two things, maybe not all of it, maybe they disagree with some of it today, but hopefully there's some tools in there that you got today that you will sort of put into action, get some momentum, and make your next meeting awesome.
Great. Thank you so much, Gord. Wow, that was a lot of amazing information, and we do have a lot of questions come in, so I'm going to start right away with one related to a subject you handled right in the beginning. What's the best way to handle a late arrival?
I've heard sort of different techniques. I'm going to say it's customizable to the given situation. It depends on who's handling it. I know one fella who used to just shut the door. That's a pretty blunt way to do things, and depending on the nature of your organization, maybe you're not the type of people to do that, but I would, the quickest answer there without getting into a long conversation about all the dynamics is just simply shut the door at the right time. And that person will either learn very quickly, or you're going to go sidebar with that person and figure out what the problem is for their lateness. But yeah, shut the door at the right time, and when they're banging on the door to get inside, don't let them in for an entire meeting, and see what that does.
Awesome. I'd like to be a fly on the wall there. Okay, moving along. Are shorter meetings generally better than longer sessions?
I think it depends on what you're talking about. I know that there's a mid-size accounting firm I came across where they kind of ditched the long meeting, and I can't imagine this, accountants in their ties and whatever, they don't even sit down in the meeting anymore. They got it down to about 10, 15 minutes. They say, who's doing what, when are they doing it, and they come back the next week and they, are accountable for that. I love that kind of short, energetic way to go about things. Obviously, for longer discussions around innovation and this kind of thing, it's going to accordion. It just depends on what the topic is. But certainly, if you're looking at your current meeting time now, why is it always an hour? Like, what's the hour thing, or what's the, what's going on with that, and does it need to be? And can you buck the current trend and really give it a change? I would just sort of say, what do we need to discuss? How much time do we need? And then stick to it.
Fantastic. Now, we have a lot of people on the call today who are generally participating in meetings and not necessarily leading them. Do you have any tips for participants who might want to provide feedback to their supervisors who are facilitating? And obviously that could be a bit of an awkward situation for them.
Yeah, and I think it's worth getting some breath in. So if you've decided that you're a participant and you're frustrated with the meetings and the way that they're going, I think you really have to ask yourself, how long are you going to be at the organization, and do you need to be just sort of getting by, and some people need to just get by, and I hope that's not the case. But if you've got the energy in where you really want to make a difference, you're going to try and get through the inventory of trying the best ways possible to reach the facilitator in the best way possible. And sometimes it's not possible. I hate to say that, but some leaders are not reachable, and if you're one of those people that's looking in, inevitably people move on anyway. But if there is a chance, find the way to communicate, to manage up to that leader. It could be that they're a conversational style type of person. It could be that they need an accolade, because in fact leaders often get isolated. That's often why they get into these jams themselves and they're doing stuff that they don't even mean to do. But if you can feed them information, find the way that that leader is going to receive information. Again, is it in a casual setting? Is it in an email? Is it in a phone call? Find that way and start to feed up and find out where you can help that senior leader to win, because everyone's looking to win, and then maybe that gives you kind of the extra trust that you need to start to introduce the good ideas that you want to punch up with. But finding the communication style and then get in there if you've got the energy.
Great advice. Now let's move on to the team building aspect. We had a couple of questions on this. One person was wondering if you had any suggestions for building rapport. Are you talking about icebreakers here? Are you talking about other things? And we had another person mention, and this is something I've encountered in the past in some of my roles, that they have sort of a 10 to 15-minute check-in before their meetings, but unfortunately they sort of devolve into just personal side conversations as opposed to something really meaningful for the team. So perhaps you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I love that you brought up the icebreaker thing. I know there's a variety of techniques that you can use for icebreakers. One of my favorite ones as a practical thing is you be me and I'll be you. When you've been sort of, long in the tooth with each other, hanging around those meetings, it's not a bad way to shake things up because everybody knows each other really well. I know I've done it with my family really well, but if you have the confidence in there and there's a good facilitator where it's not going to devolve too much, just to break it up, and this is a great way to show off behavior that someone might be misbehaving about when you kind of trade places. That's a simple icebreaker. There's loads of icebreakers along the way that you can do, but also the rapport part, if you need to have a casual lunch or a potluck or something that shakes up again the meeting space itself so that you can find ways to communicate with each other where you really learn about each other, and I'm going to say make each other human. Sometimes we get caught in these ideas where we dehumanize each other a little bit, and that's why these crazy conflicts come up. And then you realize when you step back, really it's something's going on with that person or whatever. Take the time to really get to know each other. I think that's kind of a natural thing as well. And then this check-in that devolves beforehand, that's getting back to just being disciplined and finding the why. Like, why are you meeting? Are you meeting because you really want to hang out and talk about, the latest cat video on YouTube? Is that what it's all about? I hope it's not. I hope you can be very pointed and say, we know we need to make every second count because we know we lose time, and our end user, the person who's going to benefit from our organization, is going to miss out if we misuse this meeting time. And I think it has to be brought up to that level. Not that it has to be heightened all the time, but that's the kind of focus that it takes to really use time together effectively. And so if you can get that kind of level of mature dialogue into it, then you'll use the time. Then if you want to socialize later, that's a separate kind of meeting. But really, what are you meeting about? Why are you there? Answer those questions, and I think it'll get away from then this devolved behavior where people aren't getting things done.
Wonderful. Now, we've also had a lot of participants asking about rotating facilitators. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a great idea. The opportunity to bring in different styles is a great way to shake things up. Also, it's a great way to have mentor and mentee scenarios coming through where you might have a senior person again. The mentee facilitator needs to get up and try out their stuff and then get immediate feedback on that stuff. That's a great way to build up internal capacity.
Wonderful. Now let's tackle a bit of a difficult subject here, the meeting hijacker. How do you deal with them?
I think Susan Cain has a great TED Talk if you get a chance. It's, a lot of times what's happening in meetings these days is we're getting the best ideas of the best talkers, but we're not necessarily getting the best ideas. And I'm so glad to have learned that from her. And I think if you can start to empower the quieter people, the people who are just sort of going to get by and not speak up during a meeting, to get their information into the meeting somehow. And this is back to the communication thing. So maybe a quiet person is terrified of speaking out in a meeting because the talkers are used to it. They're used to hijacking the meeting and they're used to doing their thing because that's how they get fed personally. The quiet person can maybe, work with the facilitator beforehand to feed in information and make sure that it gets onto the agenda. And then maybe they've got a relationship where the facilitator and the quiet person are going to work together. And maybe the quiet person doesn't have to speak during the meeting. That's probably fine if that's just not their thing. I know these days we say, oh, you have to learn how to speak, but if that's not their thing, but certainly their thinking, their contribution is necessary to get into the room. So maybe that can get done through the facilitator, or there can be a moment where the quiet person is encouraged. And again, the talker, I would get back to using that acronym for the word point. Really, how long does it take to say what you need to say? And so if the hijacker is hijacking too often, maybe you can introduce that concept to them, and so that when they get to their moment to say what they need to say, they've got a limit. And then some people actually do bring a clock into the room, and depending on the strength of the facilitator, you can slow them down with literally timing them out. So there's a few possibilities.
Wonderful. Now, on that note, when conflict does arise in a meeting, what are some tips for diffusing that?
The big one that I'll say is, sorry to repeat myself, but I think conflict needs to be about the issue. You're not often at work. I mean, I know personalities do come into it, so it's not that there's a zero on the personalities, but certainly the issue is there, what you're there for. Now, I as a professional facilitator, I have no problem, sort of slowing people down and respectfully interrupting to be able to then refocus the issue and reframe in conflict settings, and I deal in conflict settings with facilitation as well. But making sure that it's about the issue, and then that creates the confidence and starts to build the trust back into the situation. I would just leave it at that, given that we're not going to talk about this issue for another hour, but just make it about the issue, and then that simple thing, honestly, that we all learned in kindergarten is one person speaks. Those are two great starting points, and then seek out other ways, other techniques from your own sort of research that you can apply, that you feel comfortable applying.
Great, and we're running short on time now, so I'm just going to go to our final question. For those facilitators that are maybe new to facilitation, or it's just not their natural cup of tea, do you have any tips for overcoming nerves, or just general tips for somebody who's new at facilitation?
I think one thing that I would say is to practice the non-verbal things that you need to do during a meeting. So there's all the information about, being a facilitator, and you can do that kind of stuff. Of course, you can find great facilitators to model after. But the thing that I would say that you're going to practice by yourself, when you're at home, or, with one other person who's a friend when you're practicing, is when to be quiet, when to be louder. Those are things that if they're not natural to you, you actually have to physically get them into your body, almost like an actor would, do preparing for doing a scene, or a director would be going in to talk to the cast. And if you're able to do that, and I can tell you the specific thing is at the end of every meeting that I do, I stop and I look at each individual. It doesn't matter if there's 20 people in the room, and I say, given what we've done today in the meeting, what are you going to do when you leave the room? And then I don't say anything. And that person has to, the first person always is uncomfortable, but that person then has to think and respond, and then I help them to go deeper, and I don't let them off the hook until they give the right answer. But I had to, early on when I was doing that, sometimes people would say, well, I'm just going to go call a guy. And then I would move on to the next person. But I had to practice being a little bit uncomfortable, having an uncomfortable moment, so that physically it might feel odd, but I was able to get through and get some concrete answers. I'm going to talk to Bob on Tuesday for 10 minutes about the issue. That's what I want to hear back, because that's what really gets active. But I knew as a facilitator I had to practice. So practice the nonverbal moments, and then, of course, learn from as many pros as you can.
Wonderful. Great. So I think we'll put an end to the Q&A there. Now, Gord, did you want to talk about the book giveaway?
Yeah. You could win a free copy of my book. It's called How to Create Awesome Meetings. Really excited to give away a copy of the book. And you had a way that you thought, Marina, that you were going to give it away?
Yeah, what we're going to do is just take all of our attendees today and use a random number generator, and we're just going to choose one person who attended today's meeting, and we will email you after the session to let you know if you've won and to arrange getting that to you. And I know, Gord, you also mentioned your meeting checklist. We are going to have a link to that in the email that we send out tomorrow with the recording, so you'll be able to access some more resources on Gord's site as well.
That's great, and this book is based on the 10 steps that I went over today in this talk, so much more detailed, obviously, about some of the things that you would get there. And if you don't get a chance to win the book, it's available at Audrey's, an independent bookstore here in Edmonton, or you can get it right off the website at createawesomemeetings.com. Really excited about it, getting great feedback about it. Again, there's lots of practical tips and tools that you can use to make your next meeting more productive and profitable.
Wonderful. Did you have anything else you wanted to add today, Gord, before we close up?
I really appreciate the opportunity. A fair bit of my meeting facilitation and consulting practice is with the nonprofit sector, and I go right back to that early story. Please go out, make an effort to make all of your meetings as effective as possible, because that's something you can kind of control. I know the economy is tough on a lot of nonprofits these days, but what you can control is sort of when you're in the room. Doesn't matter who you're in the room with. And if you can do that and it increases the level of engagement, I really am looking for a macro impact from this kind of talk. I'd love it if amongst the tens of thousands of nonprofits, if some people are picking it up here, whether you're a worker, whether you're a manager, whether you're an executive director, a board member, doesn't matter, know that if you use people's volunteer time, use your staff time in this sector in the right way, that will go a long, long way to helping your end user get even further than you expected them to go. And it's something that's directly within your control, and I think it's really just one of those, it's low-hanging fruit in the early days. It's wonderful when it happens well. We know when we're in a good meeting. So I can't say enough about please taking some of these tools, making an effort, chipping away at it, and getting better kind of every week, every month, every year.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Gord. This was a great presentation. Before we sign off today, I do want to remind everyone one last time that we are going to follow up with you by email. You'll get the webinar recording, the presentation slides, the resource checklist that we mentioned earlier. We will email the winner of the book giveaway as well. We're also going to include a link to a short survey. We really appreciate it if you can take 5 minutes to fill it out. It really helps us to refine our webinar content and our delivery. You will have an opportunity there to let us know if there's any topics you'd like to see covered in a future session. So please do weigh in on that as well. And I just want to thank you again for joining us today. Thank you, Gord, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.